Hi, I'm Robert Costanza. I'm a professor at the Institute for Sustainable Solutions at Portland State University. And today I'm going to talk about alternatives to GDP. Why do we need to measure something very different than what's driving most of our policy decisions today? So GDP, gross domestic product, has been, unfortunately, the focus of much of our policies. And GDP was never designed as a measure of economic well-being. And it's really only a measure of activity, of the costs of producing and consuming everything that we produce and consume. And GDP has been going up in the United States and most other countries since around 1950, when it was first introduced and started to be measured around the world. And in the US, for example, GDP per capita has been climbing over the years since 1950 to about to now. Until very recently, when it's been sort of leveling off and going down with the recession. So people are all upset about the fact that GDP is decreasing. But unfortunately, it's not really what we should be basing our policies around. And the reason is that GDP includes a lot of things that are not necessarily positive. So if there's an oil spill, for example, someone has to go and clean up the oil spill. That leads to more economic activity, more costs, and GDP goes up. If there's more crime, if there's more pollution, GDP goes up. So what are some alternatives? The other problem with GDP is that it doesn't account for the distribution of this income. If one person made all the GDP, it would be exactly the same number as if it were equally spread over the population. But we know that the distribution of wealth has a real effect on many social problems. There's a really interesting book by Wilkinson and Pickett recently that shows income inequality versus a whole range of social problems, including everything from imprisonment to life expectancy, etc. And there's a very strong relationship with income inequality. The U.S. is way down here. Scandinavia is way down there. The more inequality, the more social problems there are. So if you're going to talk about welfare instead of just production and consumption, instead of GDP, you've got to take income distribution into account. And you have to take into account all the costs. So the genuine progress indicator, or GPI, is an alternative measure that includes, it starts with personal consumption expenditures, which are a major component of GDP, but then it weights them by income distribution to take into account the fact that in terms of welfare, a dollar's worth of income to a rich person doesn't produce as much welfare as a dollar's worth of income to a poor person. If you're talking about welfare instead of income, you've got to adjust for the distribution of income. It then adds a bunch of things that are left out of GDP, like the value of household work, the value of volunteer work, things that are positive but not really marketed, and it subtracts a whole bunch of things that are included that shouldn't be, like the cost of crime, the cost of family breakdown, the loss of natural capital items, the cost of air and water pollution, etc. So there's about 26 items that go into the GPI estimate. For the United States, GPI was highly correlated with GDP until about 1975, at which point it started to sort of level off and decline. So, since 1975, we've been in what Herman Daly has called an era of uneconomic growth. The economy's growing, but it's not economic because it's not really producing additional well-being as measured by GPI. So around the world, we're finding similar kinds of relationships. And that what we really should be pursuing is genuine progress or something like that. Of course, this is not the perfect indicator of that well-being. I think there's much more to it, but it's certainly a much better approximation to economic well-being than GDP. So we need to get off of the GDP at all costs bandwagon and start thinking of alternative indicators like this. But I think what we really need now is to build a broad consensus on what those alternative indicators might be. And there's many people concerned with doing that. President Sarkozy in France recently established a commission headed by a couple of Nobel laureates to look at what's beyond GDP? Where do we go from here? The country of Bhutan has recently become very interested in facilitating that process of, how do we move beyond GDP to an economy that's based really on well-being and happiness, quality of life, sustainability, all of the goals that we should be pursuing. So hopefully the Rio conference coming up will be an opportunity to make that transition to a more well-being based economy and away from one that's simply pursuing growth for its own sake. Thank you.